The Chinese spy scandal story keeps running on, and I've tried to kind of make headway with it today, looking at the news, seeing what I could glean from it, and it's very, very murky. It appears like there's two people who are hovering in around Parliament who've been spying for Beijing, and the top and bottom of it appears to be that there was a trial and the Labour government have essentially suppressed the information that they believe that China to be an aggressive superpower who's always spying on us and who is a danger to our national security. And it looks like the Labour Party, in particular Keir Starmer and Jonathan Powell, have suppressed that information in order to collapse this trial, in order to have a better economic deal with China. And of course there's the super embassy and all of that. Now, as soon as you start looking at this story, you start to see how deep and how far it goes. And I think it's pretty obvious when you're looking at this. This has surfaced into our consciousness. And so when these stories kind of poke their head above normality, you know that underneath them there is a lot of things going on. So here is, first of all, Yvette Cooper, just giving you her little line on this. This is the government's line, and she doesn't really say anything, so you know that they're in trouble.
The government is being accused of putting trade with China ahead of Britain's security, leading to the collapse of the trial of two suspected spies for China who were operating inside the British Parliament. Did you see a dossier when you were Home Secretary outlining the fact that China has frequently been referred to as a threat to Britain's national security, a dossier which it's alleged was never passed on to the prosecutors in this case?
Well, now let me be clear that we know China poses threats to UK national security, from things like transnational repression and espionage to hostile cyber activity as well, and we have said so. And they also, of course, are a trading partner, and they are a crucial partner in the process, for example, on tackling climate change. But I am deeply frustrated about this case because I, of course, wanted to see it prosecuted, but ministers were not involved in any of the evidence that was put to the Crown Prosecution Service or the Crown Prosecution Service's independent decisions, because this was a criminal case. And I think, as the Prime Minister has set out, this was also about not just the law that was in place at the time of the offences, but also the government stance that was in place at the time of the offences, and it was not for us to say in retrospect what that should have been. So, let's be really clear, the activity that was alleged in this case absolutely should be illegal and should face prosecution, and that's why we supported changing the law since then, which makes it easier to prosecute cases like this.
Okie dokie, everyone got that? Not really saying anything. But here is the Tory Tom Tugendhat on Harry Cole. He makes a very, very clear threat here about what it is. He's very specific, and he believes that the Labour Party are acting against the wishes of the British people. And these are kind of getting on for serious accusations here.
This play out? How do is this another great, spectacular British cock-up that will be swept under the carpet, and we'll all move on, and carry on buying cheap Chinese tat and being entirely reliant on their electric cars and their solar panels and their chips, and we'll all just pretend this never happened because, you know what, we need them.
Well, that's why I'm talking to you tonight, because it is simply unacceptable to brush this under the carpet. This is a very, very clear decision. Do you believe in parliamentary freedom? Do you believe that the British people have the right to choose their own members of parliament, those who represent them? Do you believe that those representatives have the right to speak freely, without influence, without pressure from foreign states? Or do you believe that we should cover up that influence? Now, I think that we should stand up for the British people, and there's a real question here as to whose side they're on.
Wow, I mean, that is big language. You're basically accusing the British government, number 10, Sir Keir Starmer's administration, of siding with the Beijing regime over Britain.
No, I'm accusing them of siding with transitory economic advantage over the fundamental interests of the British people.
Politician's answer, if I ever.
Well,
heard
it's
one.
true, isn't it?
But you make the accusation if you're actually saying it. You're saying they collapsed this trial. They didn't provide the evidence because they wanted to protect economic relations with Beijing.
Well, that's what it looks like. I can't tell you what the internal reason was because I am not in this administration, so I can't tell you the specific reason. All I can tell you is this trial has collapsed for reasons that are completely obscure. Don't take my word for it. Look at what the former cabinet secretary said. Look at what the reviewer of terror says. Look at what every leading lawyer, there's a series of Twitter threads by leading lawyers in the United Kingdom, all of them saying the same thing. This doesn't make sense. Now, what has changed? We've seen many, many different ministers going to Beijing recently. We've seen various people having meetings at the highest level in China recently. Is this part of a deal? I don't know.
It's clear.
But it raises questions.
And when you look at what's happened over the last week, Keir Starmer appeared like, to everyone's surprise, that he just kind of went to India. I'm off to India and I'm going to do a round there. And he went round and spoke Hindi and done all of that and, done the whole foreign dignitary thing. Must be nice to just have the red carpet rolled out. You decide to go to a country and then have a bit of a jolly before he comes back. But he was off. He didn't want to talk about any of this stuff. But when Parliament comes back, I think this is going to start exploding because there was an Ian Duncan Smith interview, which I'll play an excerpt for you here, where Ian Duncan Smith outlines what's going to be happening when they come back to Parliament.
Downing Street is a risk to national security at the moment. I mean, this absurdity that we've got here. I was one of the ones early on when this case was brought. I spoke to the security services, I spoke to the parliamentary security services, I spoke to those key elements in the Home Office. Every one of them together said that this was bang to rights. That in other words, this prosecution, even though it was under the somewhat flawed previous national security scheme, the new one is much easier, more flexible, where it requires that if you pass information to a foreign state, that foreign state has to have been an enemy for a charge to be made. Now, they all said that was the case. They all believed that they were an enemy and they were absolutely certain it would go ahead. It's only in the last little moments after Jonathan Powell had gone over to China that we suddenly hear that the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, has dropped the case. Now, when it came to the dispatch box with the Labour government, the minister danced around the reality of what was going on and said, these are independent decisions made by the CPS. Of course they are. But if the CPS does not get from the government a document that states that China is a threat, then they cannot proceed. So of course they pulled the case. But that's because the government ensured that there was no support for the case at all. And that, I'm afraid, when we get back to Parliament, many of us are determined now to raise this again in Parliament because we think the government has, in essence, lied to Parliament over what actually happened.
What will you do? What is the action you can take?
Well, I certainly think that we should at least bring this forward in another debate and force the government to come clean about what they've done. After all, it looked to me like the minister who was making that statement, the security ministers, was deeply uneasy about what he was being asked to say.
Really?
He kept on saying the simple term, which is, as they used to say in the old days, economic with the actuality. He was dancing around the idea that the CPS made an independent decision. Of course they made an independent decision, but the independent decision was determined by the lack of the government's ability to call China a threat. We have become weak and pathetic over this. I really am embarrassed about this British government.
Now, there's a lot of people deeply unhappy with what's going on here. There's a lot of Tory MPs on there, and yes, the Tories do come out and stick the knife in, but there is an unusual amount of chatter about this. Keir Starmer ran away to India. That was clear. A lot of the Labour frontbenchers are very, very tight-lipped about this. They don't want to go anywhere near this. Most of the rest of the political parties are now asking questions. You've got disinformation stories being circulated round about all of a sudden it's about Nigel Farage and Russia now. There was the Wales man taking bribes, of course, and there is that link there. However tenuous. I mean, I don't really think anybody believes that Nigel Farage is in the pay of Vladimir Putin, but these are the stories that are getting floated out right now, and this is why these stories get held back for moments like this. The government are in panic mode about what's going on, and I think, well, they should be. And for all of the things now starting to link up, you start to go to the Chagos, and the Chagos linked in with Mauritius, who has links to communist China, giving away the Chagos Islands, and all. And this whole thing, this murky thing that keeps springing up here, I think the government's in a little bit of trouble about this, and when they get back to Parliament, this story is going to explode, because these Tories now, they've got nothing better to do. They're just sitting around looking at the government, and I think they are going to sink their teeth into this story. And if there's anything going to bring this government down, this needs to be it, because if they are traitors, and that's what it is, super embassies for China. China aren't our friend. They import their cheap garbage into our country, and the stuff always breaks and falls to bits. The stuff's garbage and it's rubbish. Yes, it's cheap, but does that necessarily mean we should buy cheap goods just because they're cheap and they don't work properly? No, this is a story that's going to roll on, and this just might be the thing that takes Keir Starmer down. And of all things, would he really want to be remembered as a traitor? And he'll probably resign long before that comes to light. But this is going to pop, this story. Thanks very much for your time.